So good morning and welcome to ScholarSip. I'm Danuta Tetsky, Dean of Libraries, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's ScholarSip session. So we are recording the session, as you've seen, and as with our other ScholarSip events, we will post the recording on the library's YouTube channel. I ask everyone in the audience to please stay muted throughout the presentation, but we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions and comments and discussion. So as you know, this year marks the 10th anniversary of ScholarSip. We started this series in March of 2012 as a way to help connect inquisitive dragons to scholarship and to share a toast to the end of the academic term. We're honored to continue that tradition today. So in fact, to celebrate 10 years, we made the bold decision to host 10, quote, food for thought sessions running through the end of this academic year. But more specifically, we have the librarian's communications manager, Stacy Stanislav, to thank for not just for having the idea, but for doing all it takes to actually implement it. So thanks a lot, Stacy. So today's ScholarSip marks our 6th event, with 4 more to go through the end of June. I hope you will visit our events calendar for details about the last 4 sessions for this special year. So now I'm pleased to give a short introduction to our 6th scholarships. You know, when you have a name like ScholarSip and Scholarship, you're always in the wrong settings, I blow it. So our 6th ScholarSip speaker, Jennifer Stanford, Associate Professor of Biology and Co-Director for Drexel Center for Advancement of STEM Teaching and Learning, known as CASTLE. Professor Stanford's research interests focus on evaluating and improving approaches to teach STEM content in higher education environments to promote student learning, engagement in STEM courses, and STEM student retention. Her current work focuses on evaluating approaches to increase student access to undergraduate research opportunities and developing practical training opportunities to support STEM student professional development. After her graduate training in cell and developmental biology, Professor Stanford helped to create the first postdoctoral teaching fellow position at Harvard Medical School, which formed the basis for the current Harvard Medical School Curriculum Fellows Program. In this position, she further developed her interest in teaching, curriculum design, and assessment, and helped to create and assess a new course structure called the Nano Course. She's held professional positions as an instructor at Harvard Medical School and assistant teaching professor at Drexel, prior to her current position as an associate professor in biology department at Drexel. In these roles, Stanford has taught undergraduates, graduate students, medical students, and faculty, and I might add informally colleagues among the staff and administrators, such as myself. Through her research activities and her work with CASTLE, Stanford hopes to develop scalable and sustainable approaches to allow students to effectively understand STEM content and truly appreciate the importance and excitement of STEM fields. A final personal note here. I've enjoyed witnessing and becoming infected by her passion for improving teaching and learning through her leadership efforts with the campus Drexel 2030 strategic plan implementation to focus on innovative pedagogy. So before I turn the Zoom controls over to Professor Stanford, let me continue our ScholarSip tradition of raising a virtual toast. And let's hope that we're in midweek or midterms this term or this week. So here's to being kind. If you're on the faculty, just give them a good encouragement to finish the term and to get through the rest of our quarter. Hear, hear.
You're here.
So thank you again for joining us today, Jennifer. Over to you.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation. And can everyone see the slides? All right. Thank you so much, Danuta, for that introduction. It really means a lot to me. Working with you is a great joy this year. And so thank you so much for inviting me here. And thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm really excited to have been invited here today to talk about my work. As Danuta mentioned, I'm really passionate about what I do, and I'm going to just briefly introduce some concepts that I think about on a regular basis and highlight some of the work that I've done around those topics. And hopefully this will be a springboard for a broader discussion. I have some discussion points, but I'm really open to having whatever discussion you want to have after I present these ideas. I think a lot about effective and inclusive STEM education, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that it is May the 4th. And as a big Star Wars nerd, so I am wearing a Star Wars necklace and I am also wearing an R2-D2 shirt. I chose this date for this talk to be able to say, May the 4th be with all of you. So with that note, I want to start by raising some of the big questions that are of interest to me and many others that are focused on STEM education research. There are others, but these are some of the big ones. So how do we effectively support student learning in STEM? How do we support instructors towards using effective pedagogical techniques? How do we create learning environments that are inclusive and promote equity? How do we increase access to beneficial learning experiences so no populations are being disproportionately disadvantaged? And these are large questions that are being addressed in many different ways. But this brings us to another question, which is, why is equitable learning so important? There's increasing demand for college-educated employees, and while 65% of jobs in this country require a college degree, only about 33% of Americans have a college degree. And this is referred to as the jobs degree gap. Of those who start a bachelor's degree nationally, only about 62% actually complete that degree. And this is exacerbated in the STEM fields and also by gender and race ethnicity. So for example, while 32% of the US population is from a racial or ethnic group that is underrepresented in STEM disciplines, only 20% of STEM bachelor's degrees are earned by students from racial or ethnic groups that are underrepresented in STEM. So we aren't retaining as many students as we could be, and this has workforce implications and is an issue regarding inclusivity. So why should we care? Why is inclusivity important? Some of us may already care, but I think it's very important to talk about why we should care. And there are a lot of articles that have been written about this, and they indicate important issues about the output of the STEM workforce. And one of the people who's written about this a lot is Kenny Gibbs from the NIH. And he wrote this article that's really great called Diversity in STEM, What It Is and Why It Matters. And it's really worth looking at. I'm happy to send it to you after the talk if you would like. In this article, he indicates that diversity is critical to excellence in STEM because we need diverse problem solvers to solve difficult problems. He mentions that lack of diversity represents loss of talent. When people leave, we're missing critical contributors who had important and relevant training. And he mentions that diversity is important for economic growth and global competitiveness. Our STEM workforce doesn't reflect our national population, so it's unlikely that this is the best possible workforce that it could be. But in addition to these output reasons, I think it's important to think more broadly. The way our systems are structured makes it so that some types of people feel welcome in STEM learning environments and some people don't. Some people feel they can't succeed because of something about their identity that has nothing to do with science, technology, engineering, or math. And isn't that a problem in and of itself, regardless of the output of the system? There are students, trainees, and professionals along the pipeline who have the same passion that many people have had for science, and they feel discouraged and plagued by things like imposter syndrome, not because they're not good enough or not capable of success, but because they get thousands of messages every day that suggest they don't belong or can't be successful. And it's hard for people to ignore those messages over time. So diversity, equity, and inclusion matter for many different reasons, and it's important to think about these issues when we think about educating students. So what do we know about why some students aren't retaining in STEM? This was initially described in a book that came out in 1997 that was called Talking About Leaving, which described why students leave STEM disciplines. And this work was recently revisited by that same group in 2019. And the findings are that the way that courses are taught can alienate some students. The idea of a fixed mindset is a problem as well, that natural ability determines capacity for success, and that we should weed out those who are not suited for STEM. That's another reason. The lack of support or information about support for students is an issue, in part due to an inappropriate focus on individual effort and intelligence as the only keys for success. Other issues include student concerns about their math ability, which may or may not be accurate in terms of their assessment of this, their lack of esteem for the discipline, their lack of connection with others, and of course, financial concerns, which are a concern for student retention more broadly. One of the ways that we can improve student learning is to use active learning techniques. These are techniques that actively engage students in learning as opposed to having them as passive listeners in a classroom. We know that active learning improves STEM student learning, that learning requires that information enters into our working memory through perception filters that we all have, as opposed to getting blocked. So for example, if we aren't receptive to learning, or we have a preconceived notion of how things are, that makes us not receptive to new information in that area, we're going to block with our perception filter, and that information isn't going to enter into our working memory. Active learning facilitates breaking down those barriers to get that information into the working memory. And we know that learning requires that we challenge our preconceptions, engage in metacognition to take control of our learning, and I'll talk more about that, and are able to transfer our learning to new contexts. Active learning can promote all of this learning, and therefore we need to understand whether active learning is actually happening in classrooms, and if not, we need to understand why not and how we can facilitate active learning becoming part of classrooms. And so one way to study this is to do a large-scale study of faculty adoption of these techniques. And there have been studies done to try to understand why faculty aren't adopting these techniques that we know are effective in promoting learning. Some of the reasons that have been identified are cultural. So if your institution doesn't support or encourage this type of teaching, you're unlikely to do it as an instructor. We know that just telling people that there's evidence that this type of teaching is better, and even showing them evidence, isn't sufficient for people to actually make changes. We know that student evaluations of teaching are biased, and some instructors are afraid to make changes because they're concerned it will affect these evaluations, leading them not to get raises, promotions, or even possibly to lose their jobs. There's a lot of misinformation and distrust about why active learning approaches are needed. Some faculty, for example, see it as an entertainment approach. Oh, we need to break up the lecture and do something entertaining so that the students don't fall asleep. And so they don't really understand that it's actually about promoting student learning. Higher education reward systems disincentivize active learning approaches. As a faculty member or an instructor, you're not expected to get trained in pedagogy to be a higher education instructor. And many think it's a zero-sum game between teaching and research in terms of time investment. And that time taken away from research may harm your chances of promotion and tenure in some cases. And finally, some faculty lack a teacher identity. They don't feel that that is part of their identity in any way. And so therefore, they don't seek out opportunities to promote their teaching. With funding from Howard Hughes Medical Institute and collaborators from a number of different institutions outlined at the bottom of the slide, we characterized the use of active learning techniques using a survey that we developed called the Change in Implementation of Pedagogical Practices Survey, or CHIP for short. And this survey that we designed measured the frequency of instructional practices used in the faculty member's most frequently taught course, what support structures are present at their institution, aspects of department and institutional climate, and we studied these and other factors across 65 institutions across this country. For this particular study that I'm going to mention, we narrowed in on data from tenured and tenure track faculty, in part to understand whether teaching negatively correlates with research, which is often mentioned or assumed as a reason to not engage in effective teaching practices. So in this study, we characterized use of active learning. The general types of pedagogies we focused on were individual work in class, whole class discussion, small group activities, and real-time response techniques, so the typical clickers that you may have heard about in other contexts. We looked for correlations with a variety of factors, including institutional and departmental value of teaching, professional satisfaction, professional productivity and research load, and a number of other factors. We had 740 respondents who indicated that they were either tenured or tenure track faculty. The majority of these respondents identified as male, white, and tenured. And we primarily studied faculty in the biology, physics, and chemistry disciplines. So it's important to point out that these results are not necessarily generalizable, but we can look at correlations within the context that we saw from this population. The average length of teaching among the respondents was about 16 years. And so I don't have time to go into all the details of this today, but if you want, I can send you the publication. It's out. Across all respondents, we looked to see if they were using active learning in their classes at any frequency. And so we have clickers at the top, individual work, small group activities, and whole class discussion. And never is on the left. And then every class is on the right. And we have some, varying themes in between. And so we looked to see if they were using active learning in their classes at any frequency. And while some faculty never use any particular type or a particular type of active learning, only 6% of responding faculty never use any type of active learning techniques. So of the respondents that responded to the survey, these individuals, most of them are using some type of active learning, but in some cases it is infrequently used. More frequent use of active learning was reported by pre-tenure faculty compared with tenured faculty, perhaps because trends are moving towards learning about teaching at the graduate and postdoc level compared to where we were about 10 years ago. In addition to a number of other factors, we found a variety of barriers resonated for responding faculty. The most frequently indicated barrier was time to implement these types of approaches, followed by class size, issues with the classroom, and finally, time to learn about techniques. So as mentioned, I don't have time to go through all of what we learned today, but I'll give you a high-level summary, which is that change is happening, which is good. Our findings were consistent with the use of clickers, so these real-time response devices, being a potential gateway practice. What that means is that people sometimes start with this approach, and it motivates them to learn and try other active learning approaches. One important finding is that faculty can teach using evidence-based approaches and still be productive researchers. And in fact, we found that the use of active learning techniques was actually predicted by the number of recent publications among tenured faculty. So meaning those that were publishing more were also more prone to be using active learning approaches. We also found that grant funding was neither a positive nor a negative predictor of active learning use among faculty, which suggests that use of active learning techniques does not necessarily hinder research productivity, which is a perception that is shared among many. We did find that the perception of obstacles was a negative predictor of active learning use among tenured faculty. So that's a big picture highlight of where faculty are nationally with respect to implementation of active learning approaches. As I mentioned, there are limitations to this study. We had an overall 17% response rate, so the respondents are likely not representative of all faculty, and the responses are self-reported, so they may not be completely accurate. We can't determine causation, but our findings are consistent with other large studies that have been done, suggesting that more people are starting to use these types of techniques. So some people are using these techniques, and we know active learning is important, but why does it work? So I want to just spend a minute talking about how people learn. So people learn by engaging with material, reflecting, and understanding their own misconceptions and their own lack of knowledge. And there's a great book that's available for free online from the National Academies Press called How People Learn that talks about these issues. And so to learn, people need to address their preconceptions. They have to seek foundation in factual knowledge. They need to understand ideas within the context of a conceptual framework. They need to organize their knowledge for retrieval and application, and they have to engage in metacognition. Metacognition requires students to define their learning goals and monitor their own progress in achieving them. So this means that they have to have some autonomy and they have to have some encouragement to be self-directed learners, which is something Danuta and I have been talking about, and I'm excited about talking about that more. Active learning pedagogies can allow this, and so can experiential learning. So we talk a lot about experiential learning at Drexel. What is it? So there's this definition that was come up with by the Colonial Academic Alliance. And I'm just going to read it for you. So experiential learning is an intentionally designed opportunity for students to learn by doing, an active, engaged process that connects content to context. Experiential learning requires students to purposefully apply knowledge, practice skills, and engage in critical reflection. And this definition was developed through an activity at the 2016 Colonial Academic Alliance Pedagogy Summit on Experiential Learning, which was held at Drexel. And this definition was developed by the community at that meeting and finalized by the then executive director of the Colonial Academic Alliance, Dr. Lindsay Interlante. And some of you may remember her because she formerly worked for Drexel. And so research is a type of experiential learning, but there are many others: study abroad, internships, community service activities, obviously co-op. And these opportunities are fantastic, but they're sometimes difficult to scale. So we need to find ways to scale these approaches so that we can offer them equitably. One way to address these challenges is through the implementation of course-based undergraduate research experiences, or CURES. So these are research experiences that are happening in the context of a classroom. And these have been studied by a number of groups over the past decade. And Erin Dolan and Gabriella Weaver recently published a book on CURES that talks about how they work and how to implement them and so on. They are thought to be a mechanism to expand access to research. And we know some things about how they work best, but there are other factors that are worth studying, such as whether they can allow students to make comparable gains to a traditional undergraduate research experience like the STAR program, whether CURES are actually reaching a unique population of students and therefore expanding access to research, whether they're less resource intensive and therefore can be used as a mechanism to scale up research experiences, and to understand which elements of the experience are required for learning gains. So my research group and collaborators have been studying CURES as a mechanism to expand access to research experiences. And the team working on this includes my former postdoc, Dr. Kevin Smith, who's now teaching faculty in the biology department at Drexel, a former advisee, Dr. Ed Waddell, who is an assistant professor at Holy Family University, and my former postdoc, Dr. Annette Dean, along with other colleagues who aren't pictured. So the biology department has developed our own CURES as well as implementing nationally known CURES. And we've been evaluating these using a distinct tool called URSA, the Undergraduate Research Student Self-Assessment Tool. And this is a validated tool, which means that we know that it can assess the things that it is intended to assess effectively. It has limited limitations because it's an indirect assessment tool. It's a survey. We're asking students to self-report, but it has been shown to reliably measure gains in content knowledge, lab skills, and personal growth. And at the time we used it to study outcomes, it was the current standard in the field. Since that time, there are other tools that have been established. The tool uses a Likert scale for responses where 5 is a great gain and 1 is no gain, and students self-report gains as a result of their research experience. This tool studies 50 items, including understanding what everyday research is like, comfort in discussing concepts, and ability to work independently. So using this tool, we studied Drexel biology undergraduates who were either in the STAR Scholars Program or were participating in CURES. We had 55 participants from the biology STAR Scholars compared with 134 from across 4 different CURES at Drexel. Of the 50 items studied, only 4 had statistical differences among the 2 populations studied. Only 4 of the 50 items. So 1 was presenting a poster to present research, where students in the STAR program reported more gains in that area compared with students in the CURES. And this is very explainable because the STAR Scholars Program, as part of it, has a poster presentation at the end, and not all of the cures included this as an activity. Two other items: conducting database or internet searches and understanding journal articles, which was more prevalently reported as having strong gains among the STAR program students compared to the cures. And again, this is not a commonly used approach in all of the cures that we studied. It is more common in the students in biology in the STAR program. And finally, keeping a detailed lab notebook. This is more prevalently reported in the cures, and this is because this is a core element of the cure classes. So, of note, it's important to demonstrate equivalency, or at least partial equivalency, of cures are a viable mechanism to expand access to effective research experiences. And what we saw were there were no other significant differences among the 50 items studied for learning gains. We saw few major differences between the cures. And so the cure students are self-reporting similar learning gains, similar satisfaction with this experience, and this doesn't seem to be course dependent. We've also seen that cures seem to reach a distinct population from the STAR student population. So this is very promising in terms of being an approach that can be used to expand access to research. And I don't want to go on for too much longer because I want to leave time for discussion, but I want to broaden this out and think about experiential learning more broadly. So what if the benefits of research have nothing to do with research per se, but have to do with other things like mentorship, the ability to work on a real world problem, or other factors? And so my colleagues within CASTLE and I and others have been working on this project with support from the Colonial Academic Alliance through the INCO grant program, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, and some internal funding from Drexel. And in brief, we're interested in learning, in understanding the benefits of experiential learning and the elements that are necessary for particular outcomes for students, such as increases in retention or improved learning in a particular area. And so the team working on this project includes a large number of faculty and colleagues from Drexel, the Colonial Academic Alliance, and the specific Colonial Academic Alliance institutions, College of Charleston and UNC Wilmington. And this group has been working to ask questions about how we can expand access to experiential learning opportunities like research experiences. And to do so, we need to know which experiences provide what benefits to students. Do specific experiences provide unique benefits? Do specific experiences benefit specific populations? And with this information, ultimately, we could better advise students towards engaging in specific opportunities that could be uniquely beneficial to them. And one of the major initiatives we are working on relating to this project is to develop a new tool to study the impact of experiential learning. And this could help institutions better understand outcomes from their experiential learning programs and allow for more careful study of these programs. Prior to our development of this tool, no instrument existed to compare all types of experiential learning. There were no mechanisms to be able to identify common and unique outcomes from experiential learning. And there seems to be national interest in better mechanisms to assess experiential learning. So we've been building a validated survey that increases our ability to understand experiential learning best practices using a national data set. And so what we're hoping to do is answer questions about the core elements of an experiential learning opportunity, which are critical for the success of that experience, and whether particular learning experiences are more beneficial to certain demographic populations, and the importance of external support structures as well. So at the present time, we're working to validate that survey. We plan to roll it out with a larger population of students to allow us to start to answer some larger questions about the benefits of experiential learning. And with that, I want to move to having a discussion about these points. I brought some discussion points to the table, but I really want to be open to what you want to talk about. Some of the things I was thinking about, and especially this was inspired from some conversations I had with Danuta last week, are how can and do we incorporate real world problem solving or work into our curricula? And what are the barriers to this, and how could we overcome those barriers? But additionally, since this is a library sponsored talk, I think it's really important to think about how can we meaningfully connect experiential learning approaches to the work of the libraries to promote lifelong learning and information literacy, which should be something that we very much think about in higher education. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see people again. And hopefully this provides some inspiration for discussion.
Well, just a moment of logistics. So thank you so much, Dan. There's a lot of food for thought, and let's get to the questions, but we'd like to open it for your questions and conversation. So feel free to either raise your hand to be recognized. There's enough of us here that I think we probably need a little management. Or if you'd rather, if you type your comments in, Stacy will read them aloud and bring up the things that you don't want to speak for yourself. Or you may simply unmute, share your reflections on the topic. So let's see what will work best. And there's about 20 some of us, but I don't think we can easily fit on one person's screen. So by all means.
There is already a question in chat that I can read, if that's okay, to kick it off. First, great talk. Would you care to say a word or two about what Drexel is doing to implement it? On another topic, how was understanding of journal articles evaluated? And was the library involved? If so, how?
Thank you. So that's a lot of questions. So I'll try to answer all of your questions. If I don't, just let me know. So in terms of what Drexel is doing to implement it, so first of all, there's a lot of it's, right? So certainly the STAR program, Jaya is here. The STAR program is happening. It's wonderful. We're actually using the instrument that I talked about to evaluate the STAR program, as well as other things that are happening on campus. We've used it with study abroad as well. Cures are being implemented in the biology department. They're also being implemented in a number of other disciplines at Drexel. So engineering has tackled this, biomedical engineering has tackled this. I've worked with CCI. And so there are cures that are being developed in other places. I gave a talk in biomed last week, and we had a great discussion about, and I'm always so inspired by senior design and the other design courses that are taught in all of the engineering disciplines. And I said this last week, and I'll say it again. I'm always jealous on some level as a biologist in thinking about senior design, because we can't do that exactly. We're not a design-driven discipline. And so it's always interesting to think about, how can I engage students in that same way in real world problem solving that's meaningful within the biology context. And we've done a variety of things in that context as well. But basically, I think there's a lot of active learning going on at Drexel. I think there are there's lots of experiential learning going on at Drexel. I think there could be more active learning going on. And I know that Johanna Inman and the Teaching and Learning Center and Castle and other entities on campus are trying to promote that in a variety of different ways. In terms of how the understanding of journal articles was evaluated, so the tools that are being used are survey instruments. And as mentioned, there are some challenges with using a survey instrument, because you're asking students to self-report what they think their learning gains were in that area. Whether or not they accurately self-report is something that we have to always consider and think about. And so we cannot say whether they accurately reflected whether they made learning gains in that area, but they believe that they made learning gains in that area. And was the library involved? The library was involved in part the libraries were involved in the project with developing the experiential learning instrument. There have been a number of opportunities that we've interacted with Tim Siftar, for example, and he's provided some suggestions and ideas. And so, yes, we've tried to engage the libraries in a variety of different ways. I hope that answered your questions.
This is great. May I follow up with a few more questions?
Sure.
All right. So number one is a comment. We would love in our senior design projects to have biology students involved. They just need to ask. And
yes,
they will be very welcome. We have a great experience with students from other colleges. I think that we are the most interdisciplinary college or school in the whole university. And I know that I'm beating our own drum, but I would submit that we could be a blueprint for the future of Drexel if only all other colleges and schools follow our example. But anyway, let me focus a little bit on the libraries. We are particularly interested because we have a project running with the libraries right now with our own students. And we thought that we instructed students pretty well what they are expected to do and how they should do it. And it turned out that we're totally wrong. So I think that the whole university should really start to appreciate what the libraries are doing in educating the rest of the university and what role they could play in the future. And I think that that is missing. And I don't know what to do about it, but maybe you, as the specialist and maybe inside track into provost office, I noticed that Dr. Anandan was one of your collaborators, could spread the gospel, how important the libraries are. And on the same note, why the faculty is extremely reluctant to implement it in their classes. And I sort of agree with all the points which you made, but there is one which I think is very important and never taken into account. And that is the ominous evaluation of faculty or the units by looking into the faculty load. And that load is understood in a very simplified way, usually by people who have no foggiest idea about teaching. And it results in, let's say, reluctance of the faculty. Why should I spend time on it? Because it really is taking my time from my research. I know that the outcome which you presented was that it doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure that it doesn't matter for many people, but for many people it does matter. I think I better stop here because I don't want to take over the whole scene.
Well, let me comment on a high level. So I'm one of the 3 co-chairs for the Program and Curricular Innovation team at Drexel, which is part of the Drexel 2030 strategic planning process. And a lot of the points that you raise are things that we are actively thinking about within that group. Because one of the things you mentioned first was this idea of cross-disciplinary work. And one challenge at Drexel, it's not insurmountable, but one challenge at Drexel is how to offer interdisciplinary courses in a way that allows the instructors and the students to do what they need to do, get proper credit, et cetera, et cetera. And that is a challenge. Again, it is not an insurmountable challenge, but it is a challenge that we need to address at Drexel to allow the experiences that you talked about. I've been working since I arrived in 2008 to come up with something like what you talked about, where it would work for biology students to get together with, engineering students and do something that would help them make the learning gains that they need to make for their training. And I've tried this with a number of different faculty, and it just hasn't worked out to date, in part because of some of the barriers that currently exist and need to be addressed. And that's something that the Program and Curricular Innovation team is working on. Danuta has talked about this project with the libraries and biomed, and it's really exciting, and it's been inspirational in a way to think about how can we better incorporate the libraries into this work of real world problem solving and experiential learning. And I think probably we need to invite Danuta to give a talk about her vision of these things, because she has deep knowledge and thought about how to do this in ways that I don't think people have thought about like she has, and probably others of you at the libraries have. And so, I'm thinking about this now, that we really need to have the corollary talk, which is how can the libraries be involved? Because faculty think about it basically at the level of, a librarian could come into my classroom and tell students about the resources that are available, and that's it. And there's so much more that can be happening there, and we need to be having conversations about that. So I appreciate that. And it would be great to hear about the pilot that's happening in biomed broadly. And so perhaps Castle would love to have you come give a talk about this pilot when it's done, so that others can learn from what you all learned in biomed. And faculty load is a problem. This is something that the Program and Curricular Innovation team is absolutely trying to highlight, so that the upper administration can understand that innovation takes time, and changing your teaching takes time. So thank you for those comments.
For instance, okay, I know that it's recorded, but I will venture with one comment. It really boggles my mind that people from the provost office who are responsible for teaching strategies are not even present at this meeting. And you mentioned that we should invite Danuta. I'm all for it. I think that she gave us, in our project with Biomed, she gave us a lot of ideas how to do this. The thing is that we as units cannot do anything without having resources of the provost office. So instead of duplicating efforts in the provost office, why don't provost office representatives, I don't know who is responsible for teaching ideas or teaching centers, show up and have a meaningful discussion what to do.
Thank you. We will continue to try to engage in those conversations as best we can. So I appreciate that feedback. Other questions or thoughts?
Jennifer, maybe I should speak a little bit from experience, because Peter and I obviously were 6 faculty who founded the School of Biomedical Engineering for the express purpose of institutionalizing this experiential learning between disciplines in areas that are very specific to life-saving solutions and topics that were emerging at the time when we started the school almost 25 years ago. And all these implementations, curriculum, interdisciplinary curriculum, courses that we needed to create for core, because we are in the area of cellular engineering and informatics, bioinformatics, hence genes, and the neuro area specifically. And we have some core competences, and we allied ourselves with all the relevant academic units and have been working with their curricula as well as our core curricula that our other students can take. So there is a mechanism already functioning. That's why we have a school that is interdisciplinary. So there are a lot of already tested practices and a lot of assessment. By the way, the Academic Quality Assurance System, the APHIS system that has been used until recently and continues to be used at some level, originated with our school, because we wanted to manage the quality of the education that our students were taking. Approximately 45 to 50% at one point, at this time, I think it's only 45% of their courses coming from other disciplines, including design, including College of Computing Informatics, obviously some engineering topics and biology and so on and so forth. So there is at this school an experiment that has been going almost for a quarter of a century, and nobody seems to, and the outcomes are clear. Students who graduate are very successful, very good students until recently, and maybe now also. The highest ability students who come to Drexel come to biomedical engineering, but for some peculiar reason, perhaps because we're so busy doing it and truly moving constantly forward with experiential interdisciplinary learning, with real life solutions oftentimes, the word has not gone around. That's why I wanted to especially come and get to know you a little better, and perhaps we should spend quality time, and colleagues such as Peter and others, who is, by the way, a master teacher, and I'd like to say something about that, they can come and we can truly share what has already Drexel demonstrated as feasible, functioning, and productive. So let's come back to, so that's a plan if you like to pursue, because as I was listening to you in the teaching faculty meeting, I said, finally, we have someone who thinks systematically, analytically, but also is a teacher at heart, which means something that I like to define for you. Well, when we created the school, and now as we recruit new faculty, we typically go for those who are truly proven master researchers who are also in their heart caring for the student. So our faculty who are very active in research are our best teachers. We have so many of such examples, because when someone cares in their heart and they have the rigor of science and technology and a sense of mission, they absolutely turn the classroom into a exciting, fascinating place that people want to come. I want to give an example. We have currently, of course, several of such examples. Obviously, I mentioned Peter as a master teacher. We have a few others, but perhaps you've heard of Kara Spiller, who turned her class.
I've taught her.
Well,
I taught Kara.
taught her, but now she took everything good that is out there and put it in her class. But I like to give a specific example, because I know Jay Bath is listening, and we go far back with Jay Bath. He was our librarian and still is, and we engaged them with our courses. The perfect example, and I like him to speak out about that, was with Elizabeth Papazoglou. Unfortunately, she passed away we lost her to breast cancer. But in the meantime, while she was with us, she literally introduced that concept of totally immersing our learning partners from the library into her courses. So I like to invite, so there is, before I go to Jay, I like to say that it's the heart and the competent heart of our faculty. The master teachers oftentimes care so much about science, technology, learning, the future generations, that they will give their life to them, both in the laboratory and in the classroom. So they are not different places. It's almost the same place. Coming back to Jay. Jay, would you like to tell them how Elizabeth and you and then other faculty copied this, worked with you?
And I just want to highlight that this might answer the question in the chat from Barbara as well.
Yes.
So go ahead, Jay.
Maybe he left. Let's see, I saw him earlier. Yeah, he's here, but he's on mute.
He may be on reference.
In any case, I mean, if Jay doesn't want to speak up at this moment, perhaps he's not.
I wonder if we can invite Barbara to talk. Barbara is our colleague from University of Penn, who used to be the medical librarian and now in organizations over sciences libraries there. And so I think her question is well put to different audiences than librarians talking to libraries. Some ideas for strategies to recommend librarians to gain buy-in from the faculty and participants.
I think, Banu,
yes,
in all fairness, I will definitely support what you just said. Jay was instrumental in setting up all our all our courses. The problem which we have right now is that I don't think that Jay can take care of everybody. So the thing is, how do we modify or clone a few J's so they are available for the whole university? That is difficult.
Of course, Danuta will have to respond to that, but it's a philosophy, it's a mindset. You bring your learning partner, your literature search, your discovery partner within the your courses, your syllabi. They are in there. They are part of the learning, the teaching team, and so on and so forth. So they come in whenever they are needed. The students feel very comfortable with them, and they can be part of the projects and so on and so forth. That's why perhaps at another time we should listen to Jay and that experience that gave the rest of us a lot of ideas and ways to better serve our students.
Well, Jay's here. Jay, do you want to speak?
Looks like he's not at his microphone.
No,
Yeah,
he
I'm
is.
here. I'm here.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Jay, we
I'm-
wanted you to tell us about your experience with Elizabeth, which was one of the first test cases where
Yes.
the librarian was integrated in our.
That was many,
program.
yeah, Dr. Elizabeth Papazoglu. Is simply an amazing person. And she was the first one who asked me to collaborate with her PhD students, starting with. And especially we would go on lunch a couple of times, maybe in the whole quarter, and we discussed their projects. And then I gave out, we create some kind of an active learning approach where we create questionnaire where the students have to determine how to find a particular resource. With Peter was asking about journal evaluations. We had a session about different types of literatures and how to find those, whether journal articles, conference papers, and how it meets with the requirement. And then we did a lot of other ways, collaborating with the graduate student association at the time. Biomedical engineering had its own graduate association. And we had done several presentations for graduate students at the time.
Yes, that's well understood. That's done all the time. But what I need to you to tell your the audience here how you worked closely in the classroom, not graduate students, because graduate students, that's well understood.
Yes.
It's in the classroom, what you did with the courses that she was teaching in biomaterials. That is really the
she was teaching biomaterials class at the time.
Yes.
And she would create a list of assignment and questions. I don't have to refer to those questions, but we created a research guide, a library guide, a blog, and we would participate in journal clubs. She would have every couple of weeks, there would be a journal club in her lab, and the students are supposed to bring some articles, all discuss those papers, different component of scientific research paper. What is abstract? What is journal? How do you do a peer review and all those things at that time? But then from the undergraduate student perspective, we have a big senior design sequence where we would go as part of library guide, as part of student consultations. We do in my office or sometimes in virtually also. So as group of students would come and we would have kind of a active dialogue based. We ask questions, students ask questions, and that question answer process helps us discover the right particular resource to try out with. It is not that they are going to find the right answer. They have to explore, they have to learn how to manage failures in finding information. It is not that it's simply you type in Google and type keyword. As Jennifer mentioning earlier, there's a lot goes behind a particular tool to find the right information. In engineering, in biomedical engineering, they're looking at material property data. So how do you find that particular material which is safe, secure, at the same time cost effective? So we have Engineering Village, we have now we have SPI Digital Library, we have access to it now, and other new resources that we now, where the students have to go deeper into novel and look at biomaterial properties. And that was a key question that students had to learn in Dr. Papazoglu's class. How to find the right property?
I hate to interrupt our best salesperson of our liaison model. That's what I was hoping to get, but our time is out, and I know that many are already leaving. So I'd like to really thank all of you for coming, and ask that we all thank Jennifer for really good food for thought. We tend to have a little after party hangout that if any of you can stay, please do for a few more minutes. But again, thank you so much, Jen, for getting us going on this. And there's a lot of avenues that we'll come back to continuing this conversation. So thanks again, everyone. And Barbara, if you have a few minutes, I would really like to hear your take on what's happening in other institutions where this is sustainable, that have this kind of model. We certainly can. We know what it would take to clone Jay. We had it before, but simply it's money, and it's investment in the staff expertise. But right now, that's not the realities that many of the libraries are working with. So again, thank you so much, Jen. And
thank you.
We can stop the recording. We can keep the recording going on, but I know many of you might have to leave. So
before Jen disappears, may I just have a quite very brief comment?
Yep.
Banu mentioned the beginning of the school. Maybe she will be willing to share with you the Whitaker proposal, which we submitted, and how the school was funded to begin with, which is having a whole section on participatory learning.
Mm-hmm. That would be great to see.
At another time, perhaps. But Jen, I mean, you're absolutely the person I've been looking for so many years. It seems like you're so willing to remain scientifically, analytically very rigorous, while at the same time you're studying a very complex problem. And
so I will say that this is a field of research. So discipline-based education research. Absolutely. These are people who trained as scientists, but are using their scientific training to study education. And at Drexel, we have a number of discipline-based education researchers. Adam Fontecchio is one. Eric Brew, who was on the call, is another who's in physics. Dan King in chemistry, yes. Jason Silverman in School of Education. So there's a number of people that have this expertise on campus.
Yes, not only that, but the colleague, actually the alumna who has worked in biopharma for 35 years now is back to one of my former students is back with us, not only to run the program, but to also do her PhD in education, specifically on discipline-based is her research. And I'm learning through her all the methodology that she's learning at this moment. She is working on the academic impact of translational research managed innovation programs within a discipline. So clearly there are enough resources. It's just that perhaps what Peter wanted to say, perhaps others are trying to say, is that our provost office must embrace, together with the library, because the library is part of the curriculum, is actually the curriculum development is a whole process of not only the faculty, the students, the future generation, and all of them, is a mission that needs this approach that you're bringing. But in there, I think we should never forget that there is a lot of personality, who the teacher is, who's the learning partner is, where's their heart and where's their soul, not so much their brain. Their brain obviously have to be extraordinarily well suited for the topic, but it's how much they care. And that is
Motivations.
actually the tough issue.
Can I,
And
Banu,
yes.
if I can, so, this is not just a talk about our own things, but with Barbara and Genevieve both being outsiders, I would really like to try to engage them a little bit more in conversation. Let's get away from the Drexel situation. This is a broader issue.
I was just going to say,
There's a huge amount of research that's in the library field about the relation of teaching and learning and the like. And one of the questions I hope we might still be able to throw in here, and if not, we continue it. It's that you talked a lot about the experiential and the self-directed learning and how much time people put in informal, out of the classroom learning. And that's where I think the library can really come in. And that's part of the point. And I'm really curious if our outsider perspectives too are looking at both in preparation for the workforce and other universities that are struggling with these same pieces. So I would like to give them a chance to, since you stayed for the after party.
do you know what? And I just wanted to, first of all, it is refreshing to be outside of just like the event division. I'm like, oh, this is what, to see what clients are doing on the other side, of the event or of the celebration of the graduation. So this is like so refreshing. And I'm like, but also, I do at the education market is one of my sects here, at Live Nation, but I also am attending NYU for my master's degree. It's in event management, so it's not a full departure, and it's not like my dad's an engineer, but I feel like I bring engineering to events. But my mom has her master's in library sciences, and so does my mother-in-law. She actually she worked in the medical library, and that's how she met my husband's dad. So, I do feel like I'm like, as I'm listening, it is insightful. But at the same time, I've had to go to the library, a few times. My mom being in library, my first, experiences in volunteering were at libraries. So, on my end, it is actually nice to see that, while we're trying to find the resources of the library is working just as hard to get the resources to the students, that these conversations are happening behind the scenes. I don't know if the students even realize that, but I'm one of the graduate student officers, and, at NYU for the School of Professional Studies, but we actually had a couple of our clubs host informational sessions, first for incoming students. And we actually had them speak at the orientations, to give like an overview of each of the resources that are available, which was actually really helpful. On my end, I had to organize who the contact is. And then, she did a short presentation, made it seem, gave an overview of the library itself, the databases, the locations, introduced a few people. And I think it took the veil of unknown off of it. So that I think on our end was really helpful. But you know what? They also have a few different access points that were convenient for me as a student. They have like these video resources that instead of having to call and it's a one-off conversation, one of the librarians hosted these videos that you can just click on, be like, hi, welcome to the library. It sounds like you need help with this. And then she shared, on the video, she shares her screen, she walks through like what the needs are. And I thought that was interesting. And I hope that that's helpful.
Thank you.
Barbara, I know you wanted to tell me.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been fantastic. And I've loved hearing about the Drexel experience and what's going on there. And Jay, I've been a fan of yours for many years, as you know.
Thank you.
I think libraries have a role both inside and outside of the classroom, obviously. And I think we have our best luck with both of those opportunities when we have faculty participation in that, when faculty are helping us to drive that. For example, when there's courses where the faculty essentially require the students to meet with a librarian for a research assignment, either in small groups or individually. And yes, that does overwhelm the library staff on occasion, but that's a really good problem for us to have, is how to accommodate meeting with all the students when a faculty member does take that initiative. We can visit the classroom, as you said, that's kind of a more traditional approach. But some of the online learning that Genevieve mentioned and the chat mentioned are also ways that we can participate. And then outside of the curriculum or associated with the curriculum, the library as space is really evolving in new ways. So for example, at my institution at Penn, our biomedical library was just renovated with a new name of the Biotech Commons. We have an enlarged maker space there. It's not your typical maker space where students come and handle the 3D printers. We have 9 high-end professional grade printers that aren't consumer operable. But we do have librarians, we call them librarians, but they're not necessarily librarians by training, who have design experience and 3D modeling experience, who can work with students to help them create prototypes where they might have an idea, whether it's a science course or a design course, where they can come in and have the privilege of sitting with a position we've created. The person's called our visualizationist, and she can sit with the student and help them work out their 3D model, and we can print it for them, help them see where their own attempts at 3D modeling need to be corrected for the print to be successful. So this can be either in conjunction with the course or part of the student's self-directed learning, as you were saying. We also have a room there called a design thinking room, where student groups can check out kits at the circulation desk of Post-it notes and markers. This is a lower tech room where you can mark up the whiteboards, the tables are writable, and our visualizationist position can facilitate if necessary. Sometimes groups bring their own facilitators, but other times they may like to have, book our person along with the room to help get whatever the innovation thinking project is going. And when I think those are just some things off the top of my head. One last thing I'll mention, the library invested in a virtual dissection table, which called the Anatomized Table. And frankly, I know this is being recorded, but we had some folks at Penn say, is the library really the space for this? Like, shouldn't it be somewhere else? And my feeling was, no, I'm sticking to my guns here. The library is absolutely the space for this. Because students can come on their own time to supplement what they're doing in the gross anatomy lab. We can get interdisciplinary health science students together. Pre-health students can use it, undergraduates. So it levels the playing field of who has access to a resource like either the 3D printing, the Anatomized Table, a design thinking laboratory, a VR room where you can just experiment, see what the equipment's like and how to use it. So I think this is what libraries have always done, but providing resources and expertise to anyone at the institution. And I think that's the value that we bring, that there's no red tape here.
So I want to make sure I answer your question though,
Okay.
because you asked a really good question, which is how do we figure out how to work together to make this happen, right? I mean, you have all these wonderful resources and then faculty have ideas and there's not necessarily connections between them. And I will say, I mean, this kind of speaks to the time issue, right? That people have limited time and there's a perception filter as well, since we spoke about that many faculty don't know what they don't know. And they don't realize that there are these resources that exist. And so I think probably the answer to your question, because I've been thinking about it as we've been talking, is that the best place to start would probably be senior capstone courses or freshman design or freshman like courses like that, where instructors are trying to be more creative and think about real world problem solving and so on. And that might be the gateway to get discussions between a faculty member and the libraries, a librarian or a group of librarians. And then once the word gets out, so I think a lot about change theory. So one of the dissemination of change ideas is that there's always people at the cutting edge, and there's people that will never change no matter what you do, but there's a bunch of people in the middle. And if you put some resources and support into supporting those people that are already innovative and are already doing things, you can start to chip away at the middle. And the more that you chip away at the middle, you start to get people who proselytize and say like, oh my God, I'm doing this cool thing with the libraries, right? And then other people start to hear about it. And that means that it doesn't have to be you constantly being the person going out and talking to every person. You start to chip away and get your choir to go out and speak about the work that you do. But I think that those courses are the courses where people are having to, that's not the right word. People are interested in being more creative and innovative in how they think about real world problem solving. And that's a space where students really could use the libraries in a lot of different ways. I think not to say that they're run of the mill, all courses are important, but your courses in the middle years where there's a lot of content development, we have to work on those courses, but that might not be the most obvious place for a conversation about how to infuse the libraries. Not saying that the libraries can't support that as well. You gave a great example with anatomy, right? But I think in terms of getting buy-in, it might be through those courses to start.
Jennifer, maybe I can help. Recently, because I've been obviously in academic leadership, hence could not really teach other than seminars, but last 2-3 years, especially with the pandemic, we kicked off these courses on that are curricula for Global Innovation Partnership. These are remote courses, live virtual courses. And we put, for instance, Jay is a course builder for one of the course we introduced. I will teach it again this summer, is the brain technology convergence. This time the theme will be your brain in the metaverse. And Jay was a course builder, and he had these ideas to create an library information thing because he was experiencing the course. So one way I found to create the next generation of these very experiential learning type of courses is to bring them either as guest instructors, co-instructors, or course builders. They come in, they live with you, they experience what the students are experiencing, what all the other colleagues who are contributing to this course internationally, so on and so forth, and they themselves live it. So experiential learning is also for faculty, for the teachers. Sure. That is really, and I have done it without telling them really, because if you tell them this is what's going to happen, they may be very threatened almost. You know, they may worry about the time that it will take or whatever, but they flow into it. So clearly, I have, by the way, made a list for hopefully a meeting that we would have that we should touch upon because there are good practices and you have the right approach. And at the end, hopefully, our provost office, whomever worry about the future of our curriculum, will consider library is an integral part of what we do as academic units, that the library will be embedded in us. That is, if that could be accomplished, then everything will happen almost naturally, organically.
Can I, before you run off, I really appreciate this. And this is some of the stuff that we're recognizing in this planning committee and trying to see the role. But Barbara, I wanted to invite you and let you know, and others too, when you're talking about environment. This question I was going to ask Jennifer in this context earlier in her work about thinking about where learning happens. And so much of the research, this is an area I've been looking at for a number of years. What's the relationship between the environment, the learning environment, and actual learning? And much of the work has been done in classroom settings and thinking about, learning will be evident if learning behaviors and active learning behaviors are usually what's used as the indicator of whether learning is happening in space. I'm interested to know how much research, have you come across research? That's what we've been trying to find, is the relationship between learning and informal learning environments, which is not the classroom, which is what I would say libraries, museums, other areas are providing where the learner takes ownership and the learner is deciding what's the problem. And that, to me, that's the vision of what the library as place is. And in that context, just to quickly get the setting, we have just joined, for a year, I've got money to put in, I don't know if you've looked at Flex Space. This is an international consortium that is working on some of these questions, bringing really technology and design, instructional designers together to look at how to design these environments. And I keep telling Jay and the rest, our expertise is part of the elements, the factors of the environment, as opposed to, we're here as something to necessarily, it's another way of visualizing what role the library is. So by joining this group, because a lot of their activities, this flex space stuff is available freely, but taking a year of membership, and we could both be involved in this if you'd like. To get on the agenda, there is a committee there that's working on what are some of the research issues? How do we assess this? How do we find out what's the impact of it? So let's, another time we get together for coffee, Barbara, for sure.
This is fantastic.
But I think this is really another area that speaks so much to what you were bringing us food for thought. How do we assess it? How do we provide evidence that there is an impact? It's not enough just to say, well, in this recent period of trying to answer our provost question, so what's essential about what a library does? It's one thing, we've done all these change things, but you have to get it into the culture and the commitment of the institution to really feel that value is needed, as opposed to just the transactions and knowing what we're dealing with. So this is another way of doing outside the broader arena, what is higher education's need for this kind of area of looking at learning and all. So I'm thank you very much for bringing it up, because it's always, when somebody else outside says it.
Can I add one more comment before we close?
Sure.
I just want to remember that Peter and Peter, Elizabeth, myself, we went for a lunch like 15 years ago in a faculty club, and Dr. Elizabeth Papazoglu and Peter Lewin, we were all there. I don't know whether you, Peter, remember, but at that time, it was such an informal and engaging conversation. And she brought up so many ideas. She questioned me with a lot of thoughts that how we can educate our students. And that really inspired me to integrate within the biomaterials course. And I happened to find this old presentation that I just posted in the link in the chat. But it was old, and I don't think it is a good website, but actually I was able to capture that biomaterials course with Elizabeth in the slide. So I will try to discover if it all somewhere I can find it, and I'll share that with you. I might have that in my archives, I'm not sure, but this is somehow I got find it. It was presented at American Society of Engineering Education Conference in 2007 with Elizabeth and myself for the co-presenters for that class.
That is absolutely correct. Thank you for that, Jennifer. I have a suggestion.
Okay.
How about if Danuta hires you as an envoy or ambassador of the libraries?
Oh God.
No, I'm very serious.
I have a better
From the discussion, Danuta,
I wanted to become part of the libraries. I want that whole group to come in. We can work together on dealing with this.
Danuta, let me finish, please.
Yeah.
What I got from this discussion is that there is certainly a lack of understanding among all university units.
Yes.
What is the importance of library and what library delivers? And I think that I remember several years ago where Elizabeth and I invited Jay to come to Biomed faculty meeting and explain what are the possibilities and what the library is good for and why do we need the library. And I think that this type of envoy like action is needed right now, because I think that our great leadership does not really understand how important the libraries are.
And how embedding it into your learning processes, not only for the students, for our stakeholders, but also our own teachers, professors, faculty, is so critical. That is something that can be articulated, I think, best among us by Jennifer. Am I correct, Jennifer?
I think there are a number of people that can do this, and I don't want to take total credit. I mean, there are people that think about this every day and aren't asked to speak. I'm very fortunate that Danuta asked me to speak, and I'm also fortunate that Adrian asked me to speak in Biomed last week, but there are a number of people that do this work who could speak to these things.
You could
and we
be
need to hear from all of them.
spokesperson. You could be the spokesperson for them, because this is why, I mean, I know a great number of the sort of rising generation faculty such as you, but some of them truly may not be able to articulate how you articulated. So it's a proposal. By the way, like I said, I hope this conversation continues. And thank you, Danuta, and the library colleagues for organizing the scholarships. They are always very useful. Thank you.
This is great. Thank you. It was really thought-provoking. Fantastic.
And just as the last person, politically, where the voice will be heard, and Banu, I'm putting you on the spot too for this, and you, Peter.
Well, I
It's gotta
will
be the
always
teams.
be
It's gotta
behind
teams
the
and
listen,
administrators.
Danuta. Time has come when, in the last 10, 20 years, I've been behind colleagues such as Jennifer, doing things, amazing things, and we are the people that support them, but quietly, because
Now-
they should move ahead. They should define the new culture, new times. And by the way, I wrote in the chat, when you're talking of environments, you have to begin. By the way, you may actually become a course builder in this course, Your Brain in the Metaverse. Libraries will be the perfect places for the metaverse
So
to live in.
all I'm doing, Banu, is inviting you to come out front again, as you have in the past, and influence your colleagues, the young and upcoming administrators. And that's how the organization.
Yes, thank you for
That's
doing
awesome.
this, but I've done it so many times, created so many different new things, despite the university's sort of mindset and everything. But I think in Jennifer, we have a wonderful, very articulate and very philosophical, and as well as very research-oriented spokesperson. So Jennifer, you're becoming our spokesperson, whether you want it or not. It's
Back to the
done
planning
already.
board, as I said.
Peter, do you agree?
I totally agree that
Yeah. Okay, done.
Jennifer, Danuta, and Stacy
Yeah.
and Jay should start thinking about visiting the units and banging on dean's doors
Yes.
to explain to the faculty what is the role of libraries.
Yeah.
Because I can only reiterate what I just said. We in Biomed, at least my team, was arrogant enough to think that we knew how to use library and how to use library resources. And we selected actually pretty good students for the pilot study. And it turned out that we were totally off the course.
It's like throwing students in an ocean who are not swimming, and then not able to swim, and they have forced to swim. It's so much of information out there, and each database is so unique that you need to really understand the functioning before you can really start searching.
So Jennifer, you have your work cut out for you.
I was going to say, I have a full suite of activities. Yes, we will.
As much as I'd love to continue this, I know others have.
I think, Jennifer, you can use it in your future discussions with the provost office about your faculty teaching load.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you so much.
you.
And thanks for staying.
Thank
And,
you. Great conversation. Thank you, Barbara. Good to see you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.